Welcome. Thank you for joining our ECM Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Sabu Vis, our ECM practice leader, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, USDM at a glance, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, SharePoint in the life sciences. We will present an introduction to SharePoint, the different components of SharePoint and how to use them to automate a business process, and of course, compliance and validation. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Ventura, California. We've delivered successful projects with over 130 life science clients, and we're the preferred compliance partner for small, mid-tier, and large life science companies. We specialize in assisting clients with reducing regulatory risk while maximizing their investment in ECM, QMS, manufacturing suite and laboratory instrument systems, and IT infrastructure. Our directive is to simplify, unify, and optimize compliance and business objectives. Just a quick introduction of Sabu and myself. Sabu is our USDM Group Vice President. He has 15 years in technology and regulated life science domains. Sabu leads the USDM IT infrastructure and ECM practices. I'm an account manager and a marketing team member for US Data Management. I joined the team nearly 5 years ago. My background is QA compliance within the regulated industry. Before we begin, let me go over the webinar logistics. The content will be covered in 30 minutes, and then we'll welcome questions. If you're having issues logging into the system, I suggest you turn off your pop-up blockers. This webinar will be recorded and made available on our website. We invite you to post questions for the presenter via the iLink message board on the left of your screen. And we further invite you to direct questions following the webinar to myself at rmelody@usdatamanagement.com. The overall goal of the webinar is to facilitate discussion, share ideas, provide the platform, get to the edge, and then explore solutions together. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Sabu. Enjoy the webinar.
For your time. Real quickly, some exclusions or scope exclusions. I'm a big fan of keeping the conversation within scope. Not going to talk about SharePoint 2010, so that's going to be excluded. There'll be a separate webinar that will address that, as well as any migration issues from 2007 to 2010. I'm also not addressing look and feel stuff, master pages, themes, and cascading style sheets, page layouts, and web content management stuff, and all of that. Anything associated with portal look and feel is something that I'm not talking about. Again, all of you know SharePoint it can be an ocean. There's a lot of things that you can do, so I'm trying to stick purely from a business process automation or business process management perspective and how that applies to life sciences. I'm also not going to make this a very tech speak, geek talk seminar or webinar. I know the geeks shall inherit the earth, but this is purely from a business perspective as well. I'm also not going to differentiate between what you can do with the regular point-and-click SharePoint GUI or what you can do with SharePoint Designer, or what you can do with some hardcore development using Visual Studio, C#, programming, etc. I'm assuming you guys have some familiarity with SharePoint, so I'm not going to get into what you can do within one particular place and what you cannot do. So with that, it's difficult to gauge the audience here, so I'm going to give a brief introduction, brief introduction on SharePoint itself, and again, try and simplify it as much as possible. SharePoint is truly a collaboration and productivity tool, and what does that mean? How does it provide productivity for me? In several ways. Personal productivity, right? Making sure that the right information is available to an individual at the right time for him or her to perform her job. So essentially, they can log on, they go to their My Site, or they go to a particular portal. They have access to their documents. They have access to their task lists that have been the tasks that have been assigned to them. They have access to search, and they have access to information from other systems, even. I mean, from your ERP system or your warehouse management system or something else, all coming piped through the portal. Of course, team productivity as well is a big part of SharePoint. You can have document workspaces where you can have a document and discuss the document, share ideas. You can have meeting workspaces where you can manage agendas and meeting minutes and tasks and follow-up activities and all of that. And of course, a whole bunch of plethora of project management tools and Gantt charts and task lists and issue management lists and calendars and things like that. From an enterprise perspective or from a management perspective, SharePoint also can render itself to provide wonderful key performance indicators, dashboards, management dashboards, and of course publishing content throughout the enterprise, internet as well as intranet. Of course, content management and workflows and automating the variety of business processes, and also it provides a portal to present the information from a variety of systems as well. It's an interesting case study. We actually worked on a particular project once where we were working on a portal for pandemic preparedness. So what will this large company do in case there's a flu pandemic? I mean, of course, we were all talking about that recently with the swine flu epidemic. So here we developed a portal. This has, again, got nothing to do with compliance. It has nothing to do with validation in Part 11, but I just wanted to kind of highlight this because I wanted to kind of emphasize the point that pretty much any business process can be automated here using SharePoint. So for this particular pandemic preparedness website, SharePoint was used to manage all the information that you need when a pandemic hits. So you can't get into work because you're afraid of spreading the pandemic or you catching the influenza. So you need to be able to log into a secure portal with extremely granular security. I mean, the facilities people, EH&S people have to have visibility on certain things, but the regular rank and file people have to have access to certain things. So this was a central repository for all the information associated with pandemic preparedness, really. Links to all the guidelines, policies, plans, where even things like where are the masks, where are the thermometers, where are the masks, I mean, things like that. Everything was stored here. Links to external references. Even vendors could access the information and kind of make their decisions from there. A central console to manage their meetings, manage communications. It was also tied up to communications server, Microsoft's communication server, so they could chat and do all of that directly from there without ever having to leave their house. That kind of keys into this supporting remote workers thing as well. I mean, you really can set up remote access, of course, with SharePoint, and you can, without having all of the same, without having a desktop or a company laptop or a company desktop, you can still access and get the work done. And SharePoint also provides tools like data retention and records management with their built-in record center, or you can use your own custom workflows and features to manage data retention and so on. So let's just get to a little bit about the widgets of SharePoint. There are many components to SharePoint, and a lot of it is highly technical, and I'm not going to get into too much of that. But I'm going to kind of focus on the important widgets or the important components of SharePoint, and talk a little bit about how they work, and then kind of use a real-life case study, a very simple case study. I'm going to use a training management system as an example, and show you how these little components can work together. Yeah. So the intent really is to walk you through these widgets and not try and talk about too much of the technology. The goal is for you to envision how you can use SharePoint for your business process. Okay. Let's start with the document library. Excuse me. A document library is a typical document library like you would have a physical library. You can check in, check out documents. You can edit them. You can obviously version control, version management is very tightly part of the document libraries as well. And these are also extremely well integrated with Office applications like Word and Excel, because quite a few of the activities can be done directly from the Office application without ever having to open the browser. The beauty of the library truly is the columns or the metadata or fields. SharePoint calls them columns. So you can create any type of column or any type of even reusable site column which can be used across multiple libraries. You can even create custom content types. For example, you can create a content type called software module specification, right? So that any library, if that library uses the software module spec content type, it automatically pre-populates some columns, like say, developer name or tester name, module title, or whatever. Similar way, you can even have site columns, say social security number with a particular format. Now, you can use that site column anywhere across, the form, and not really have to worry about reconfiguring it each time. So there are a lot of advantages and very, very powerful ways that you can use these columns to describe the documents. So the doc libraries themselves can be of various types, like picture library, web pages library, or even forms library. And forms library are, that's an important library that you can use for your business process automation as well. We're in this life sciences business. Paper is everywhere. We fill out a whole bunch of forms. Using InfoPath, we can really make them, electronic and more intelligent, where we can tap into source data and kind of pre-populate information, make things a lot faster, and using workflows, route these forms across a lot faster as well. So that's important. And an important thing that's missing from this slide that you see is security. With the libraries, you have extremely granular security. I mean, you can set up who can view documents, who can approve, who can edit, who has access to the library even. You can even go crazy where you can set up item level security, meaning per document you can set up specific roles and who has access to that document. So that can be, it's useful in certain cases, like web pages when you do a page library, but it may not be useful in certain other cases. So you have to be very careful when you set up item level security as well. And of course, the library support workflows. Essentially with workflows, you can automate anything, any action. Very simple, basic actions like approve a document or route a document or write something somewhere, to fairly complex software packages in and of itself. I mean, with a particular action in this workflow, you can really pretty much pull information from an external source inside, pump data out. I mean, you can do a variety of things. They're extremely powerful tools. We talked about the library. Let's talk about the list. What really is a list? Lists are extremely powerful as well, and anything that can be described in a few columns or in a few fields can be made into a list. Let's talk about, for example, if you manage a real-life example here. We had a client of ours who managed the product information, right? They managed the potency, solubility, cleaning difficulty of all of their products in a spreadsheet. It was a large spreadsheet, fairly difficult to manage. Now, this can easily be converted into a list. What are the advantages? Better audit trail. Each library and list has audit trail built in already, and there's version control, better security, more granular security. So it definitely helps in that kind of a scenario. You can even convert simple access databases to, so for example, you have an access database to manage assets with like 4 or 5 tables. You can easily convert those transpose that into a bunch of lists which are interconnected and still serve the same purpose. There's a variety of built-in built-in lists as well, like calendars, contacts, linked lists, announcements, which serve to be pretty powerful tools in your overall business process automation initiative. Pretty much the same rules apply as the library. I mean, here we've divorced ourselves from the document, but this is just essentially a slew of metadata. So the same thing: workflows, security, versioning, the powerful columns, and all of that whole good. Excuse me. And my throat is a little dry here today. A very important aspect of it is of SharePoint is that the CD underbelly, or the tech speak really, is that Microsoft has exposed the entire object model of SharePoint, right? So you can pretty much manipulate and use the lists, the libraries, the sites in any which way you want. So you can trigger scripts based on events. An event is like item adding, meaning I'm adding a new item to the list. So before I add it, I want you to run this .NET script or this .NET assembly to perform certain activities. And once you add it, you can run another script called so that's triggered after the item added event, right? So item is added. Oh, why don't you write a transaction into an audit trail list, which is separate, which has the date, time, transaction, who did it, when, reason for doing it, and so on and so forth. So those can be extremely powerful. For instance, you have a user list, and before somebody deletes something, you really want to go through 2 or 3 checkpoints where before the user is actually deleted from that list, it goes to to the HR manager. They have to approve it, and certain other activities have to happen. You can actually trigger that through that particular process as well. So essentially, a pretty powerful tool to programmatically automate your business process. Excuse me. Of course, eventually you have to present all of this information in some form of a GUI, and essentially all of these libraries and lists and the information that's stored are rendered on web pages, and within these web pages are web parts, and the web parts have pull up relevant information that you need from the underlying SharePoint lists and libraries, or from external sources as well. So there are these out-of-the-box SharePoint web parts. There are also additional web parts that you can pick out of SharePoint Designer, like data views, which can be extremely useful and powerful as well. Or of course, you can custom build the web parts to pretty much do what you want. Again, excuse me. Again, since the entire object model is exposed, you can manipulate and render pretty much anything on these web pages. So all of these lists, pages, libraries reside within a site, which can belong to a site collection, and in turn belong to a web application. And I'm not going to get into a lot of details here, but it's useful to know that each individual web application can be segregated from other web applications. I think that's very critical information to have. So, for example, you can keep your validated instances or your validated web apps, or validated applications as part of 1 or 2 web apps, and your non-validated stuff as part of another web app. So if you have better control for validation and change control perspective and configuration management. And each web application has its own content store, basically its own content database where all of the content is stored and managed. So those are distinct advantages of having these web applications. Furthermore, there's the form server. The form server enables you to render these infopart forms. If you recall, a couple of slides ago, I talked to you about forms libraries. Now, you can actually render infopart forms on the web without a client desktop or a laptop having infopart on it. There are some limitations, of course, but it further enhances the overall automation capability of these forms. In our industry, we have a lot of paper, and excuse me. I'm really, really hoarse today. In our industry, we have a lot of paper, so if we can build feature-rich forms and put that data up on a website for people to enter, it's really, really useful. The business data catalog is one of the SharePoint shared services that essentially allows you to integrate back-end line of business systems, like your ERP or whatever with SharePoint. So using the BDC or the business data catalog, you can pull data from other databases or other services and have that information show up in lists or web parts or search results or user profiles or within your application that you built within SharePoint. And this integration is fairly straightforward enough to do. You can essentially describe the data using like an XML data file, metadata file, and then the BDC does all of the operations necessary to get that information into SharePoint. So that can be really, really powerful, especially when you're trying to integrate your application with some other backend applications or your business applications like your ERP systems or your external HR software or whatever it is. And lastly, features. Features are really the backbone of SharePoint development because essentially it's good programming practice to manage all of your custom development with features and deploy them as features. And these features can be deployed at a site-by-site level, and it can really the features can give you tremendous control over the overall configuration of SharePoint as well as the capabilities of SharePoint. The workflows are a special type of features essentially, and you can start a series of operations like approval operations or review operations or manually, meaning I trigger this workflow for this particular item, or automatically saying, hey, okay, I checked in this document, now trigger this workflow automatically, or whenever I say hit approve, it should automatically do something. And like I mentioned earlier, the workflows can be really simple or can be extremely powerful applications in their own right, so too the features. I apologize for my really, really dry throat today. Excel services, that's another important SharePoint widget. I'm not going to talk about it in a lot of detail, and this is a fairly busy looking slide, but if you take the technology out of it and look at it purely in a nutshell, Excel services are built into MOS, and you can expose essentially Excel spreadsheets without needing a client-side Excel program, meaning I can log into my SharePoint site, and if I go to a particular place, I can actually see a spreadsheet without ever having to instantiate Excel on my own. Now, what are the advantages here? Excuse me. You can lock cells, meaning only show all of the information in the spreadsheet, but really allow editing of a few cells. So you run the script, it automatically renders you an algorithm, uses the algorithm and renders you a result. There are a lot of ways that this can be used. For example, if you have a lab and you have a spreadsheet that performs certain calculations based on some data input that you get from an HPLC or something, right? We all struggle through spreadsheet validation efforts and all of that. So you really want the end user to be locked into a few fields where they enter the data and then automatically get the result. Right? You really don't want them to mess around with the underlying logic because that really compromises the results, right? So you can set up with Excel services where you can set up this whole spreadsheet and validate that spreadsheet as part of your overall effort and then expose just what you want the users to see, and then you're covered. In lieu of time, I'm going to kind of move forward a little bit. So now that we talked a little bit about these various widgets, how can we apply this? How can you apply this to a real-life case study? I'm going to look at training management as an example. I'm going to use a very, very simple training management system. What do we really, really need in a training management system? We need a bunch of users, their titles, their names, and all of that, right? We need a place where we can keep the training materials, SOPs, for example. And they have to be version controlled. Someone's routing it, approving it, and once it's approved, users who are affected need to be trained, right? They need to be training profiles, meaning, QA Specialist 1. QA Specialist 1 needs to be trained on 7 SOPs and 8 other documents. QA Specialist 2 needs all of that plus 5 more. So we need a place where we manage that. We need a place for managing training records, meaning I trained on this particular document. When was I trained? Was it instructed training or read training or whatnot, right? And then perhaps a task list saying, hey, you have training due, or hey, you have a document you need to approve, or there's a document that's expiring soon, you need to edit it, or a place where delinquencies are reported. Hey, Subbu was supposed to train on this two SOPs yesterday, and he's delinquent, so you better do something about it. And perhaps an audit trail, a place where you keep track of all of these various changes to the profiles or these records, right? So that's in a nutshell the overall business process flow, right, for training. So how would we actually implement this in SharePoint? So we'll have a user list, right, where every time a new user is added, perhaps a task is triggered to I'm going to call this person the training manager, saying, hey, there's a new user in the company. This user needs to be assigned to a training profile, right? Meaning he needs to be assigned to a profile, say he's a QA Specialist 1, and once he's assigned to a profile, he needs to be trained on all of the SOPs associated with the profile, right? So you might edit the user, right? So you edit that item in that list. Perhaps the title is changed, for example. And if the title is changed, perhaps the profile needs to be changed as well. So you send out a task to the training manager saying, hey, this person's title has changed, double check his profile. Or you retire the user. If you retire the user, he should no longer be part of the system, right? And he should be out of all the training profiles and so on. And some sample metadata that it could have, a user full name, department, et cetera, et cetera. Perhaps this can even be populated, auto-populated from an HR database that's external to SharePoint. So that's one way of automating it. So the next thing that you might need is a training document library, right, where SOPs and training manuals and all of that information is stored. Obviously, version control, auto-numbering can be a feature, right? And when you add a new document and you actually approve that document through a workflow, when you approve it and that workflow is triggered, tasks are assigned to various approvers and reviewers to perform certain activities. And if they reject it, tasks need to be assigned to the author saying, hey, this was rejected, do such and such. But if it is approved, then a task needs to be assigned to perhaps the training manager or the QA manager saying, this is a brand new document or a new version. Does it need to belong to a new profile or an existing profile, right? So that's a task. And once this document is linked to that training profile, we want to send out tasks to all the users who belong to that profile saying, hey, here's SOP XYZ, you need to be trained on it, right? And what else do we need to do with this document library? Perhaps the documents expire periodically. And, so before they expire, perhaps you send out a task to the author saying, hey, this document is due for expiry a week from now, you better edit it. So that's another way of, and that's another feature or another workflow that can be triggered. And you can look at the various metadata that's associated with this particular library. Again, this is just a very, very simple example. What else do we need? We need a training profiles list where, we store a list of SOPs associated with this profile. And if you remember earlier in this users list, each user is associated with one or many profiles, right? So that's how we track all of this information. So training profiles, when you have a new training profile, you have to have some documents associated with it. So that's an activity that can be triggered. And when anything changes, tasks are assigned, meaning the new documents are added to it. Say new documents are added to this training profile, you automatically have to send out notifications to every user saying, thou shalt get trained on this and so on. Then, of course, you have a training records, which contains who got trained, when, where, in what kind of way. Was it, read or instructed or failed and so on and so forth. So this is extremely critical to have per user, per document, version specific, and it's a permanent record that nobody can change. Of course, we talked about tasks being triggered on and off right throughout the process, and that's managed in a task list. And finally, okay, so this is how this overall system works. but it's also very important for us to have role-specific dashboards, meaning a training profile manager should have fairly high administrative kind of rights for this overall application, right? He should be notified of training delinquencies and new users and new documents and so on. But the QA manager or QA doc control manager perhaps just manages the document management portion of it. And a regular user just needs their task lists and their list of SOPs that they need to be, that's part of their profile. And that's about it. So you can create role-specific dashboards that people have access to. Excuse me. Other requirements include security and delinquency checks, like I talked about, and audit trails. Audit trails with SharePoint has a fairly thorough audit trail, which you can turn on as well. But some of it is pretty cryptic and it's hard to get to. So you can actually program your own audit trail as well on using those event triggers, and you can populate that as part of an audit trail list, perhaps. So that's a real-life example. If you really look at it, it's a fairly simple example, but it kind of tells you, gives you a broad-based view of a particular real-life case scenario and how SharePoint can automate such a business process. Now, you can kind of apply that to pretty much anything else. You can build a calibration management system in SharePoint, I mean, if you really truly want to. Or a maintenance management system in SharePoint. So it renders these various widgets. You have to have these various widgets talk to each other, and when you actually design the system, you can put all of that in place and put the entire business process flow in place and design a system just like how I talked about the training management system. Excuse me. So we talked about a particular application. What about Part 11? What about validation? Obviously, we're in this business. So how do we manage against all of this? Again, like I said, SharePoint is extremely configurable in the sense that you can really program it such that you can lock down every view, you can lock down every form, like the display form, the edit form. You can lock down what the user can see and what the user cannot. So you can go to that kind of a level as well. So the security for each individual library and list and site is extremely granular. You can set who can see what, and you can actually go down to a document level or an item level and set up security as well. From an audit trail perspective, there's fairly deep audit trail within SharePoint, and above and beyond that, you can actually use custom programming to enhance the overall user experience with the audit trail. So you can butt in before a document gets checked in, perhaps, and write an audit trail transaction or perform an eSig transaction. There's a detailed publication by Microsoft as well, which talks about the Part 11 implementation using SharePoint and Office, and I'll be more than happy to route that across to whoever sends an email out to Becky at the end of this presentation. Lastly, validation. SharePoint is highly customizable. So anyway, there are a lot of different ways you can actually use SharePoint. At its root, it's an extremely validatable platform. So the way you would approach the validation is just like you would approach any custom-built software. So if your SharePoint implementation is extremely custom configured and coded, it's a white box to you. So just like how you would do a GAMP5 validation, you can do the exact same thing. With a client of ours, we set up that training management system. We validated it, and it was not, it wasn't a big deal at all. We just went through the entire GAMP process for validating it, and we did it. Similarly, excuse me, we did that EDMS as well. So where one of the validation documents, the process for authoring, reviewing, the approval workflows, how it was tied into this training management system, all of that was set up, and we validated that entire application as well. As part of that particular implementation, there were also libraries that were just out-of-the-box SharePoint functionality, like a system manuals library or an engineering documents library. But even these, we tested the basic functionality and made sure that it works. And we went through the entire validation without much of a hitch, and it worked out great. But it's also extremely important to have a strong system architect when you actually put something like this together, so that they plan out the overall strategy from a technology perspective. Also from the validation and compliance perspective, like change control and configuration management. For example, we ensured that the security was extremely tight and well set up. But one of the downsides is that, especially with security, people can change this as they go. A security administrator today, the system admin today is very different from the system admin tomorrow, and the roles and responsibilities change over time. But we made sure that there were procedures in place to periodically check security, and there was an audit process in place to check the overall security against what it's supposed to be, and that's how we mitigated that. So it's critical for us to kind of manage that and maintain that. And the system is not just the application. The system is its processes and the people around it. So it's very, very important for that. And most validatable applications like the off-the-shelf applications that you get, like Abacus BPM or NextDocs or FirstPoint, are all products based on SharePoint. And then they use the more glorified example of what I gave you, the training management system. They obviously are accounting for it in a more broader perspective. That's all. So in effect, they work the system exactly like how I described it, but it's just a different business process, and they obviously check for a lot more things than the brief, simple case study that I presented. And there are also several online case studies that are available. These are freely available on Gartner's website, Microsoft's website for the Pfizer's SharePoint implementation, or Roche's SharePoint implementation, even Affymetrix, I think, and a few others. And if you have trouble getting to any of these, just shoot Becky an email, and I can dig these up for you and send it across. That's it. I think I overshot my time here today. I apologize. While I drink a sip of water, I'll start reviewing the chat questions as well.
I'd like to tell you that our next webinar in the ECM practice series is titled Integrating Your ECM and Regulatory Submissions, and it's scheduled for April 20th. We certainly hope you can join us then. You can register for this and other events on the USDM website, which is usdatamanagement.com. If Sabu's voice will hold out a few more moments, we are happy to open the floor to questions at this point. If you just click on the chat tab at the bottom left of your screen, you'll be able to enter questions there.
Yeah, and feel free to mull on this a little bit as well. Again, this presentation will be on video. Go through it, ask questions within your own organization, come back to us as well. Feel free to email Becky, and you can see her email address right there. And we follow up with each and every one of you and answer questions. Again, it's a very, very broad topic, SharePoint. There's a lot of things that we can talk about. And I hope I covered a few basic questions that you might have, but anything more in-depth, feel free to ask them now or ask them via email as well. And I also apologize for my horrid voice.
You did great, Sabu. We do have a few notes coming in, but they're more requests for the case studies that you referenced and copies of the slide presentation as well as the recorded video and such. At this point, I don't see any questions, so we'll take a last call.
Actually, there's another question. You're right. That was also about the case studies. Frank Bruno asks for links, and I'll send these links out, or Becky will send them out within the next few hours, or latest by the end of the day, or something. So we'll send that out.
Very good. We so appreciate you making time in your day to join us here for information sharing, education all around. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.